Welcome back to Community Conflict. I am happy to have another NCRP alumni here with me today, and in a minute I'll have her introduce herself to you, who is actively working with community conflict. Whitney, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to start by saying a bit about yourself. You graduated from our program. How many years has it been?
Well, I graduated in 2012, so I've been out of the program for just over 3 years now.
Okay, go ahead and tell the students a little bit about yourself, what brought you to NCRP, and what you're currently involved with.
Okay, great. So during my time actually with NCRP, I was also interning for a nonprofit agency located here in LA County called Centinela Youth Services. And we're located in Hawthorne. And during my internship, I was facilitating conflict resolution workshops for youth enrolled at Hawthorne High School who were attending Saturday school for one disciplinary reason or another. Okay. And during those Saturday sessions, we teach life skills, decision making, conflict resolution, and so forth. So that was really my entry position into the world of conflict resolution within Los Angeles and within an agency that's actually practicing conflict resolution and mediation.
What had you done before you came to NCRP? Were you working with youth? Tell us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I received my undergraduate education at Pitzer College, which is a private liberal arts college in Claremont, California. And during my time there, I was a resident assistant. So that was, I would say, my
working in the dorms with conflict resolution.
And
perfect.
Even in my high school years, I was on student government and so forth. So I always found myself in kind of a leadership capacity and trying to resolve as much conflict and spread as much communication as possible with whatever community I was working with.
Well, let's talk about community, because I just asked Whitney, does she see her current work as community conflict resolution work? And she replied, absolutely. I think we need to talk a little bit about how we experience and create community. And let me say one thing. I've been reflecting on this as I've been thinking of Whitney being here. I am also a victim offender mediator with first-time juvenile offenders. And I live in a really nice neighborhood where we actually greet our neighbors as we walk dogs. It might not be the traditional Los Angeles experience, but I deliberately chose this community. And generally when we think about community conflict, petty crime, juveniles, unfortunately where I lived, there was a horrible hate crime. We called it a hate crime because a group of African American students beat up some of the local white students. So that's how we think about community. And we also choose communities not only for neighbors, but because our children need to go to good schools. We want them to have a good community influence. How do you see yourself doing community conflict?
Absolutely. So after my internship with CYS, while I was finishing up the NCRP program, I was fortunate enough to be hired on with CYS to coordinate their victim offender restitution program. And essentially, we coordinate mediation efforts for first-time and second-time offenders within
all juveniles.
Yes. We serve some youth who are 18 by the time that they get to us, but they committed the offense when they were a juvenile. And the offenses range from theft, as you were talking about, if it's a theft of a store or an individual person stealing a cell phone or something of that nature.
Any burglaries, home?
Burglaries, residential burglaries, vandalism, battery between students or between youth, and we even receive battery incidents where a youth is cited for battery against a teacher at school or even a parent within the home.
Yes.
We facilitate those mediations. And in recent times, we've actually expanded to a little bit more, I would gather, kind of serious situations where recently we've even facilitated an incredibly successful mediation process for a youth who was arrested for criminal threats against a school. So in light of recent times and
yes.
The severity
The
of
shootings.
school shootings
Yes.
and school violence, to even have all the parties involved in law enforcement and the court system agree to buy into a mediation process as a way to resolve this situation
Yes.
is relatively unheard of.
Well, and so critically important, I would say, since Whitney's brought up the horrific tragedies we go through repeatedly. But she's also reminded me, for those of you who have not yet studied restorative justice, one of the benefits, and this brings back my own victim offender mediation experience, not only is our family members welcome, and normally when a child, a youth is under 18, that's a requirement that they be involved, and extended family is welcome, but in my mediations, community members were at the table as well. So if someone was robbed, had their store or their resident robbed, they were at the mediation table.
Absolutely.
And you know, you've gotten a great, Whitney's given you a very vivid picture. I would like to remind you of when I introduced my work with community mediation centers. The conflicts are often very similar. The only distinction is that a crime has been committed, and at that point, the criminal justice system is involved. And that's another community, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
so you can go on and yes.
it's a community that we cannot neglect to include in this kind of conversation. And something that is incredible within CYS is we've served as this focal point in bringing all sorts of law enforcement, juvenile justice stakeholders to the table to discuss the current climate and what's currently going on within LA County. And recently, we've delved We've delved into our juvenile arrest diversion program, which at the time of booking, so when a law enforcement individual is responding to a situation and a youth is typically taken to a police station to be booked and processed and cited for a situation, instead of being booked, they're being enrolled into our restorative justice services so that this youth doesn't even accrue a record.
Well, and you know, this is not restorative justice, so I'm not going to be giving you the research. Did you happen to take the restorative justice course when you were in the...
You know, it's kind of funny that I fell into it after NCRP.
Yes, okay. The research is quite strong. Where I did the majority of my victim offender mediation was Colorado. And so before I moved to California, I'm most familiar with the research there. But I also have worked with Mark Umbright and some of the big restorative justice scholars. And if you're interested in looking at research, Mark Umbright out of the University of Minnesota and Marquette University has tons of research on juveniles.
Absolutely.
What Whitney is describing to you is the #1 intervention for preventing repeat crime. So, you know, we try therapy, we try punishment, we try all sorts of things, groups. Victim offender mediation, where the offender has to meet those they've harmed and negotiate repair of harm. Restitution is normally it's monetary.
Actually, in CYS, monetary restitution tends to be the most rare.
You do negotiate a lot of ways of repairing harm. Let me finish with saying it is the #1 most effective way to help turn a youth's life back around in the direction we want them to take. Yes.
And in particular, the VORS program with CYS is an evidence-based program. So in about the early 2000s, we did a research study, particularly with our VORS program, and it's been determined that the recidivism rate of the youth who participate in VORS is drastically
much lower than the others.
A control group, to the point where even we do a check every 6 to 12 months, and now the recidivism rate is about 10% of the youth who go through our program
that's
end
incredible.
up reoffending, which is again, kind of unheard of.
Miraculous. It
Yeah.
actually is a wonderful example of, I have talked in other classes that mediation can seem miraculous to parties in tough, entrenched conflict. They're always wondering, what did you do? We had no hope. We walked in and now we're walking out with something we feel good about. But I'm actually going to, because we have limited time today, but I'm going to say two things, and hopefully we'll cover, what Whitney wanted to share with you. I would like to say, generally our alumni are fine if you connect with them after, an interview like this. So feel free to write me. I'll introduce you to Whitney. You can talk more. The first thing I want to say, since all of you have been asked to do service learning in this course for a few hours every week, is Whitney's life experience with being hired mirrors mine. Internships can make all the difference
Absolutely.
to an NCRP career. So if you're feeling like, geez, I don't have time to do this service learning this week, please keep Whitney's job offer in mind. It's great. I am hoping to have one of our law enforcement alumni come to an interview to talk about police community relations. But since you brought up this kind of dialogue, can you give us an example or two of where police has maybe, or the other criminal justice people have benefited from having this dialogue with members of their community?
Absolutely. One scenario pops into my head immediately where a youth who had been pushed out of her school environment for a number of reasons and personal situations that she was going through, and she was trying to return to campus to attend a mandated therapy session at a time when she was suspended from school. So she shouldn't have been on campus, but she felt like she needed to attend this mandated therapy. And the principal of the school tried to remove her from campus, and it ultimately ended up in a scuffle. And police responded to the situation, and because of the history between the student and principal, the student was incredibly, she started to escalate the situation pretty intensely, just given that the situation had not been resolved previously.
Well, just put yourself in her shoes, and I can't wait to hear what happened. This is not unusual with conflict with our youth today. The school community is giving a youth mixed messages. She has a mandated counseling session, but the principal is furious that she would dare to return to the school community. Yes. What do we expect our youth to do if the community adults are not communicating with each other, right? So Absolutely. Here we bring in the police.
Yes. And during the scuffle, law enforcement ended up responding, and the youth ended up hitting the police officer as she was being removed from campus. And essentially, she was cited for battery against a police officer.
Right, wow.
So we end up receiving this case, and we facilitate the mediation process between the youth and the police officer to resolve the citation that was received. And this was such an eye-opening experience for the police officer to understand that when they are responding to a school setting, they need to be cognizant of everything that might have happened previously.
Right,
the
history
context, and the relationships between students and staff and so forth, to where it's not about them just responding to a situation and paying attention to the facts or de-escalating the immediate
or
situation.
The facts they've been given.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so this opened up a larger conversation that we were able to have with that entire police department, to where they have bought into our services and are supportive of
collaborating with you, working with you,
and really honoring and emphasizing the importance of mediation and dialogue for not only school situations, but within the community, that in order to not only resolve the particular incident that happened, but to ensure that relations continue past that, there needs to be a conversation.
Yes, and this is a great example of how NCRP is helping with this other critical need. Whitney's mentioned a couple, the threats to the school, now community police relations. We do have NCRP graduates who are in the forces around the country who are attempting to do what is called community policing, restorative policing, and this is a wonderful example of how NCRP collaborates not only within but without.
Yeah.
Now we only have a few minutes. No, we're getting a really nice picture of how you're using your NCRP education. You're delivering conflict resolution education to community members, right? Some are becoming mediators
Yes.
that are helping you. In fact, if some of you are in the LA area, you know, you need to be thinking about where you can, beyond this class, be doing your internships. This is a great place to get mediation experience that might be highly meaningful to you. You're also, are you mediating as well?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So typically we rely on our volunteer mediators to facilitate both our victim offender but also our family mediation program.
Okay.
However, as needed, staff comes to the rescue and mediates situation as well. And that's really where my reserve energy kind of gets replenished when I'm able to
You
be
love
in
the
me-
mediations.
and
Okay.
you talked about the magic that happens in mediation. It's hard to describe to somebody who hasn't necessarily been in a mediation,
Right, who has not
previously.
experienced. And I gotta say, the most powerful way to experience would be for you to go to a community mediation center or a nonprofit like Whitney's as a party and experience the transformational energy that happens when someone gives to you what Whitney's giving to the parties she's mediating, right? You're hearing them,
Yeah.
you're understanding them. What parts of your education do you find most valuable with this community conflict?
Thinking back to the classes that I took, I would say just the classroom experience that we had in understanding the mediation process was really
Yes.
helpful.
Yes.
Because we can try to set up a conversation between the parties in a conflict or within a community, but there does need to be a level of formality essentially to the process. There
Sure,
needs to
there
be a
is a
beginning, a middle,
structure.
and an end.
Yes.
And I think my time within NCRP really helped me understand the theory behind it and the variety of processes and procedures that are available to any type of conflict resolution process.
It gave you the beginning structure for mediating. Anything else you do in our last 5 minutes that you want to share with the class of community conflict students that they might spread to their communities? I will say, those of you not in the Los Angeles area, well, I'll speak to both. The Archdiocese actually approached me years ago about restorative justice in Los Angeles. Whitney Centinela Youth Services is one of a few nonprofits that are starting to address the dramatic need we have in Los Angeles. If you're in Chicago or New York, you're going to know. You just can't have enough of this to respond to the need. But for those of you outside of Los Angeles, you may not even have a restorative justice service in your community. And so this is something to take to the district attorney's office. Who actually funds what you do? Do you mind sharing how that works?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So a portion of our funding comes from LA County through the Dispute Resolution Act.
Yes.
We're one of 12 agencies within LA County that provides mediation and dispute resolution services.
California has a Dispute Resolution Act that where money does go towards nonprofits that meet their certification requirements. That's worth investigating if you're in California. You might be able to do, they might be able to do this in a lesser served community.
Yes. But I would say if state or county funding is not available, we do a large portion of our funding comes from private entities or just submitting grants. In the recent years, we have seen a cut in funding that's available for these types of programs. So we've had to become a little bit creative, and that's where our partnerships with law enforcement are really developing, so that we can
okay, good.
partner with law enforcement or partner with a school district
Yes.
to provide our services.
No, those are great ideas for getting something going and keeping it going. We do have a couple of last minutes if there are some things you want to share that I haven't given you an opportunity to share.
Absolutely. So if you are considering opening up a similar agency or service in your area, I think one of the main things to take into account is including all of the necessary stakeholders to
Yes,
get
good.
the program off the ground.
Who would you include? Because getting the program off the ground is not the same as what I would say inclusive stakeholders, right? Diverse stakeholders. This it has to pay attention to power, resources, right? Yes. Yes.
We need to, in a way, work within the traditional juvenile justice system in order to be considered a level stakeholder in the process.
To have legitimacy,
Yeah,
yes.
to have legitimacy.
Yes.
So we actually, we receive support from the presiding judge of the juvenile justice court within LA County.
Good.
So it is important to have court support. The district attorney, as you mentioned, public defenders is another
Yes.
group to look towards. We work with LA County Probation, so the probation department, several law enforcement agencies, whether it's city PD or the sheriff's department. It's important to include them, as well as you want to include the community as well. So it's not just about the
power
politics
players
and
yes.
the power. We include the supervisors of the LA County district, because as we know, they tend to
Well,
have
now that is power
that
and
is,
politics.
yes, but
yes,
along with
yes,
it, there's
good.
representatives from each demographic and region of the county that we're serving. So it is important to honor and acknowledge every key player in this process.
Yes, to build sustainable, ongoing relationships, yes.
And it's hard. And
Yes.
I think one thing that we've come across is even including media to a certain extent to open up the lens on what we're doing. I think mediation, there is a large emphasis on the confidentiality of mediation and the types
Yes.
of services that we're offering. So obviously we don't want to identify or alienate a particular person or an incident that we're working with, but it is important to acknowledge and open our services so that there's a larger understanding of what's being offered and
No,
what's being done.
If you remember last week, we talked about media as exposing injustice. So positive use of media, but a little different than what Whitney's suggesting. As a public relations vehicle, critically important
Yeah.
too, because people need to see this as a positive for their communities, not a threat in any way, right?
Absolutely.
We are so fortunate to have you with your success stories here today, because I believe NCRP is just beginning to tap its potential and to reveal its potential. And you've mentioned some of the, hot areas, the tragic areas, and we've only had 25 minutes together today. So thank you very much.
Thank you
Yes,
so much for
it's-
having me.
It's wonderful to hear about your success.
And I love coming back to NCRP. It's
We have a nice community.
Yeah.
Okay, Whitney's going to end on that note. If you're not already getting that, given I'm asking half of my interviews, if not more, will be with our alumni. We have an incredible community, not only locally in the South Bay, LA, but we have an incredible national and international community. And most of the power players that Whitney just listed, we have some alumni in every one of those slots. So if this is a real interest of yours, please don't hesitate to be in touch with me to be introduced to Whitney. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for having
Yes.
me.